Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 270. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today, Michael Drach. Michael, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure, mate. I'm really excited for this one. I think there's going to be some really cool stuff that we can get into with this episode. I'm sure there's a lot of the listeners that have seen some of your work along the way, whether they know it or not. They probably use some of the drills that you've put out, seen some of your work. But just give us a little bit of background on yourself to start with.
Yeah, so my name is Michael Drach. I've been a sports performance trainer for almost 20 years now. And I started off my training career in Chicago, and I was there for a good amount of time and got exposed to lots of different athletes there, and then kind of moved down here to Tulsa, Oklahoma in the United States, and a little warmer climate, a little bit nicer here. And so I had to start my business from scratch. But that's a whole other story. We can kind of like dive into that if you want to. But yeah, I mean, a little bit about my background is growing up, I played almost every sport you could think of. I was obsessed with whatever season it was. That's the sport I played. You know, soccer, football, basketball, tennis, golf. You know, you name it. I was obsessed with it. And at a young age, I was always the, I guess you could say, fast, skinny kid. And so I understood how speed and athleticism can make you, you know, much better at your sport. And I was obsessed with that. I think I remember looking back, even in like probably 7th grade, 8th grade, I remember making a sled out of wood and putting weights on it and doing sprints in my backyard. And, you know, where I grew up I was in Wisconsin at the time, like there was no trainers. That wasn't even an option. I didn't even know that existed. And so it's just like, I was trying to think of ways to make myself even faster. And so it's kind of interesting to see like my passion back then, you know, and how I got into this field. And, but anyway, like that led me into, you know, me since being so small, I still wanted to play college football, American football. And so I went to the Division III route, you know, the smaller schools, but that was the best thing that's ever happened to me. I understood what a college sport was like, the work ethic, and how to train myself because I was, you know, small for that sport. You know, I had to like really dedicate myself for the next 4 years to improving my my strength and my size and my speed. And that's when I really fell in love and knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to train athletes. And so right after I graduated, I kind of one of my teammates' brother started a speed training company. And so right after I graduated, you know, I asked him if I could like work for him and instantly fell in love with it. And I was like, this is what I was born to do. And been doing it for almost 20 years now.
And how's it been having the facility, working in the private sector? How have you found that?
The private sector, and so I got to experience a tiny bit of the university side of the training. So right after I graduated, my boss was contracted by Northwestern University up in the Chicago area to do their football program and their speed training. And so me and him for 8 years would go there twice a week and put the whole football team through speed training. And so I got to see a little bit of that side of things while staying in the private sector, and it made me appreciate both ends, but it made me understand like maybe my personality is more of the private sector. I'm not a in your face, you know, choose someone out for not finishing through the line type of guy. It's, you know, I'm more of a like I'd say maybe like a teacher. I like to teach how to move your body right, you know, what positions you want to hit. And so and I love the relationship that you can build with an athlete and the one-on-one sessions. You know, you train these kids sometimes for years, and you can really be a positive voice in their head and impact in their life. But you know, but the private sector also has its other complications too. It's like if your majority of your athletes are you know, the teenagers, well, you know, most of them are in school, and so you know, most of your hours are going to be after school hours and you have to work late. And so there's positives and there's negatives, but I love what I'm doing.
Awesome. I wanted to start on a couple of topics that we've covered in previous episodes around speed, but I wanted to get your perspective on it. So when
For
we're
sure.
talking about developing speed with players, and when I talk about players, obviously talking about footballers, soccer players now. With that, where should our priorities lie? Where do you think we should be focusing in terms of developing speed with players?
Well, let me ask you, what age group? Developing speed at what age?
Okay. So if we let's start with academy players. So if we're talking sort of 15 and under to start with.
Man, okay, so being in the private sector, I get to work with all age groups, right? I've got 30-year-old professionals. I've got 10-year-olds that are coming to me for the first time, and sometimes I say that's a little too young, but man, it goes into the mechanics for me. It has since day one. You fix an athlete's mechanics. The earlier you get them, you raise their speed ceiling so much. Their potential is so much greater. And I've seen it, sometimes I'll get an athlete just one session, and I tell them, it's like, if you can just like take what we learned here today and just keep running that way, you're going to keep getting faster, because the mechanics, I can go more in detail if you'd like. We can go into max velocity mechanics, acceleration mechanics, but if your mechanics are off, if your body position is off, if your hips are in the wrong position, it destroys your speed. And I've seen it too. I think it also plays at a much higher risk of injuries as well. I mean, specifically the hamstring injuries. And so that's the first thing I no matter what level I would get, I guess my answer would be, let's start with mechanics. The younger you are, the more moldable they are. The older they are, the harder to change old habits. But if you get someone that's willing to listen and learn, it's like, yeah, you can get a 25-year-old professional athlete that can make changes within 2 sessions, and they will instantly like, oh my gosh, this feels different. This feels better. It feels different. It feels strange, but I feel springy for the first time. I feel like I'm running with ease. I'm not straining while I sprint. And so, and yeah, I'll go into more detail if you'd like. I can, if you can understand the 3 biggest things that I will focus on, let's say for max velocity, is understanding the hip position and your posture. And so what I mean by that is, when an athlete's at max velocity or close to max velocity, if they're not more upright, if they're more leaning here still, like they're still accelerating, their pelvis is going to be tilted as well, anteriorly tilted, and they're never going to be able to hit their potential and max velocity, because posture and hip position completely alters the path of the foot to the ground. And so, I mean, I'm guessing most of your listeners are smart people, and so they know like what, lots of force, short ground contact in the right direction, that is speed right there. And so, but if you alter the foot's path to the ground, we're looking for the foot moving backward according to your body position, your center of mass. If the foot is striking forward or even more down at contact, like, you're gonna hurt your force direction. And so it's almost like it's almost like a braking effect. It's not quite a braking effect, but it will, it'll impact the speed a lot. And so, like, man, the first thing I do is, like, if I get a new client in, I get a good warm up in, and let's get right to it. I call it speed school. Let's go. I get them on, and I'll record a couple sprints, and then I go to the whiteboard, and I'm teaching them on the whiteboard, doing stick figures. Okay, see this video? This is where your position is. See this video of this, really fast sprinter? Look where he is. He's more upright. And so, and you're going to get some pushback. Not so much from the athlete, because when you have them do it, they feel it. They're like, oh my gosh, this feels amazing. But you might get some pushback from some trainers and some coaches that say, well, that's good for a sprinter on the track, but not for a soccer athlete. They're never going to hit those positions. And I will argue, I can pull up any match right now at any level, and I can show you the off-ball athlete sprinting at max velocity. It happens all the time. And if you can improve an athlete's just their body positions, like you're going to set them up for like to be much faster and healthier and safer too. So.
No, that's brilliant. I know you mentioned before about sort of 10 years old being probably too young in your opinion for starting that sort of work. So if you were to be in control of that, what age would you be starting at? So if someone's in an academy now, they're working with younger age groups, and we're talking about mechanics, we're going to prioritize mechanics, where would you want to start that?
Man, so I could say 10 is an age where you could start. I've had some 9 and some 8-year-olds that are I'm very selective at that age who I take. You know, if the parent reaches out to me and it's like, I have an 8-year-old that wants, and they need to be more explosive. I'm like, okay, hold on. Like they're 8, you know, like, can you give me some more details on what they're struggling with? And then they could say, it's like, they look goofy running, or they're out of control. They have no control of their body. And that's where I'm like, okay, well, bring them in. Like, let me see if I can just like help them understand how to get their body in some better positions, even though that's really young. But if I had to choose, it depends on the athlete, but 11, 12, I'd say more of that 12-year-old range is really good. And I've seen it over and over and over again. You give me a 12-year-old consistently, even once a week, but twice a week would be awesome. You give me a 12-year-old for 2 times a week for 6 months, different athlete. They come in as one of the slow athletes on their team, one of the slowest, but they work hard for 6 weeks, and you change their mechanics. You have them hit these fast, stimulus of max velocity a couple times a week. They change. Like their slow twitch starts to turn into fast twitch. They become more springy. Their foot contact with the ground is solid. It's not like a mush contact, and we're making their springs tighter, and they come out like a different athlete. And they're thrilled, but other parents, they're like, oh my gosh, like, what did you do to my kid type stuff. And it's those kind of stories are like why I love what I do. Yeah, it's great taking a professional athlete and working with them just because of the level that they're at. It's fun to see someone at their peak, but it's really rewarding to take a young athlete who is slow and making him one of the faster athletes on his team. That's why I love what I do.
You're opening up so much potential with that as well, aren't you? Because they're at that age.
Yeah.
Just on that as well. So if we now revert to first team or sort of 16 plus in terms of an age, if you've had that athlete or someone similar has had the athlete from 12 onwards and they've worked on a lot of the stuff we've covered already, where would the priorities then lie at those later ages?
I mean, you got to start doing strength training with them. And so, I've seen the different sports here in America and which athletes love the weight room, which ones don't. Soccer, they don't love the weight room as much. American football, sometimes they love it too much. And so, but yeah, you got to start strength training with them. You got to, you got to make them stronger. Absolutely. So they're more resilient, I think, on the pitch. But I would still do a heavy focus on speed training. Even maybe going into, I mean, I do it with my younger athletes. Resisted sprints. Resisted sprints are researched over and over again to show benefit in acceleration and horizontal power. And I mean, let's be honest, why do we have athletes lift? Is part of it is to make them more explosive and stronger so they can move better. A bigger other part is to prevent injury. And so, but I always have an issue with strength coaches here in the United States that will squat and squat and squat and squat and squat with their athletes and get them, they can squat 600, 700 pounds, but they move like garbage. I was like, well, what's the point? Why are we doing that? If the weight room, if what we're doing in the weight room is not going to translate better to what's going on in the pitch, then what's the point? It's like, now I'm not saying don't squat, I'm saying absolutely, but there needs to be an understanding of how to take the strength and the force that you learn in the weight room and apply it to moving your body. For acceleration, how far can you travel in that first step, and how fast can you do it? The hip displacement, how can I stop on a dime? That deceleration component, changing directions. So like that all stuff has to be, start putting into these programs. And we can dive more into that, my approach on change of direction and acceleration training if you want. I'd be happy to go into that, but let me know what you want to, how much detail you want me to give.
No, I'd love to dive into that. We'll go into that in a second because I think it'd be great to get your perspective. The other thing I was going to talk about, again, which we've covered a little bit before, and this will resonate with a lot of coaches, is so we've talked now about the priorities. When coaches are working with players, especially over in the UK, they'll probably be really limited on time.
Yeah.
In terms of time available. So it could be a couple of 15-minute blocks, a couple of 20-minute blocks per week, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about mechanics, we've talked about strength training, we've talked about resisted sled work. If you were to have that time, so say we've got 2 15-minute slots with a first team, let's say, where would your focus be if you're managing a squad now? So we're not working on an individual basis or a small group basis. We've got a squad of players.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a hard one. I mean, I know it's always the biggest challenge for strength coaches, performance coaches. You get short amount of time. What do you do? I would, if I had 2 15-minute blocks, I would do, I would probably start off with some plyometrics, working on that springiness, the Achilles tendon, the foot. If the foundation, if your foot and Achilles can't handle the force, it's gonna then all the other stuff that you're going to be doing is gonna translate very well for developing speed. And so, I mean, gosh, who was it? Stu McMillan. I think he's been on your show. He talked about, I went to the 1080 conference and he was one of the speakers, and he did a demonstration of just talking about the importance of the ankle joint. And he's like boxers, they've been registered at producing like 5 times the amount of force of their body weight into their opponent's face, right? And he said that wrist has to be solid. If that wrist is bent or if it's weak, that force is not going to translate into the opponent's face. He's like, for sprinting, that wrist joint is your ankle joint. He's like, the foot and the Achilles, we want that to be strong and stiff. And so, that's where these, simple plyometrics, single leg hops, but it's working on hitting the ground really hard, really fast, and developing that your RSI index. And so that can be done in 5 minutes. Very simple stuff, single leg hops, low intensity plyos, maybe a little bit higher, going over a hurdle. Then you can go like 2 feet hops, going over a taller hurdle. It's hard to have a squad doing box jumps or depth jumps, but I would just do I would focus on that for 5 minutes. And then I would go into top speed mechanics. Even if they're not even hit max velocity, have them hit 90, 95% and hammer away those mechanics, teaching them what it feels like to get their hips underneath them, to be more upright, to get more front side mechanics, get that knee, that hip flexion, get the knee up. And that way the foot can start cycling back underneath them, and it's going to land closer to their center of mass. And so that has to just be habit. And so even if it's not full speed, a 90% sprint is not that exhausting. It's a good warm up prior to going out on the pitch. And so, but you can set habits even if you're at 90, 95%. And so that's what I would do for one day. And the other day I would probably do the simple plyos again to start off with, some plyometrics, and then go into acceleration. And I would do resisted sprints. And now I know you got, 20 kids, maybe 30 kids, 30 athletes. It's hard to have a sled for every one of them, but a heavy resisted band can do wonders. And even if it's a 5 meter sprint, heavy resisted, they can get some really good benefits. And so, man, I'm trying to think. It was Les Spellman who partnered with University of Arizona football for in-season resisted sprints training. If your listeners haven't looked into that at all, look into that. It's, we're always afraid to do, sprint training in season with our athletes, but what they did is they used the 1080 machine to kind of really hone in on each athlete's resistance. But they did, I think, 2 sprints a week, really heavy resisted sprints a week. And I think they even altered every week, really, really heavy to moderately heavy, to really, really heavy to moderately heavy every week. And they found that their athletes got faster in season. The goal is just to maintain speed in season, especially acceleration speed, and so it doesn't take a lot to at least maintain speed or develop some power that's going to help for acceleration. So even doing like 3 heavy sprints, that's what I would do. And then I would even start into, so that could be like seriously 5 minutes right there, and then I would maybe try to introduce some deceleration and change of direction. But that's hard. There's so much you want to do. But that's where I would start. I hope that was a good answer.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. It's great to get your perspective on that, because I know that's a real life challenge that a lot of coaches are facing. I wanted to move into the change direction work now, because I definitely want to spend a bit of time on this with yourself.
For sure. Yep.
When we're looking at change direction, when we're looking at players, I know you've done some great content on this as well, so I urge people to go and check it out. But when we're looking at players, and we see some players that change direction really well, really efficiently, some other players just seem to get stuck. They just get left, and whether that's defending, attacking, whatever sort of position in the game, you see some players really struggle with it, don't you? So how would you break that down? Why do players struggle, in your opinion?
Yeah, and so I really dove into this years ago, because the majority of my athletes were slow. And, I would get a really, really fast athlete sprinkled in there, and I'd be like, what is making this athlete be able to like just stop on a dime, boom, and he's out of the cut, compared to this person who's getting stuck? And, what my brain went to was, it's the eccentric loading. And so let's just do a real simple cut. Okay, let's say I'm shuffling this way, and I have to stop and shuffle back. Okay, and so I know there's more different terminology of which step is which, and so you have that outside plant step, or the final cut. Then you have the penultimate step. I call it the inside plant step. That's just easier for my brain to understand. So let's just talk about that outside plant foot. Okay, you have body weight and momentum coming in. That foot hits the ground. That is a fast eccentric loading. Okay, think like a squat, the lower end of the squat. If I drop into that squat really fast and try to stop, that's a fast eccentric load. Okay, and so you stick that foot into the ground. If the athlete can't handle the load, they're going to get stuck. If an athlete can handle that eccentric load, think like a spring compressing. If their springs are strong enough, they can spring out of that cut. And so then that got me to like, well, how do you train that? Okay, how do you train someone to be springier vertically? Okay, well, what trainers will go to like a depth jump, box drop, hit the ground, spring off the ground, or hurdle jump, spring off the ground. So I started thinking, well, how do you load up an outside plant foot cut? And to me, it was real simple. It was like, I use bungees. So I started putting a bungee on there, and a bungee is really easy, because you can, based on how far out you are, you can increase the tension. Closer you are, there's less tension. So even if it's like a 10-year-old athlete, you get a light enough bungee, all you have to do is pull them in a little bit, and their body has to adapt to that. And so But then you go into the whole pre-tension. So before the foot makes contact with the ground, it's the body's way of preparing. And so that, you probably hear some really good sprint coaches talk about the pre-tension before the foot hits the ground, the dorsiflexion, and then learning how to strike the ground before your foot hits the ground. And so I will tell athletes to just strike the ground. And so that if they put their foot in the ground rapidly, it instantly will create a tighter spring. But if they wait for the foot to hit the ground and then their body and brain reacts, it's going to be slower. And so a simple drill I'll do for that is I call it a jab bound. And so the athlete's standing, here's the 2 feet, they're standing, they're picking up this foot and they're just striking and they're doing a lateral bound. But they're learning how to punch the ground and have that strike move their center mass laterally. Then you can go into even more detail, what part of the foot strikes the ground. Most athletes will strike the ground flat foot. You watch their foot hit and it's completely flat, okay? Well, they're losing, there's some springs, okay? And so I'll try to teach the athlete to, if you stand on 2 feet and if I shift one direction, I can feel where my body weight shifts on my feet. One foot's going to have pressure on the inside of the foot. One foot's going to have pressure on the outside of the foot. And if I have the athlete shift the other way, I was like, do you feel the weight shift on the part of your foot? And they say, yes. It's like, okay, you want to have that in mind when you change directions. If you feel your body, or if you feel the weight shift to the outside of your foot too much on a cut, most likely your shin's going to get vertical and your torso is being vertical and you're going to get stuck. Okay, we got to keep the body angle, the shin angles, all at a steeper angle. The steeper the angle, the faster the cut. And so I'll tell the athlete, you want to use that big toe joint. Strike the ground on the big toe joint. Now your heel might kiss the ground. It might be on the ground, but your weight is on that big toe joint. So now we're getting the arch of the foot as a spring. You're getting your Achilles and calf as well as a spring, to where if you land completely flat foot, you lose that spring. So that is just all outside plant foot training. And so I'll put a bungee on. I'll do any kind of I have the athlete kind of shuffle in and strike the ground, move out, or a bound, strike the ground. And so they're learning, and not just learning, but they're training their body to handle more fast eccentric loading. So that outside plant foot, that leg, becomes a tighter spring over time. And so without doing any reaction drills or any true agility drills, they should get better at agility because their legs and their springs can handle more force. That makes sense? That was a long answer for that, but hope that makes sense for listeners.
I think that was awesome. I think that's a great insight into it. And obviously, straight away, I think a lot of listeners have got some elements they could put into the training as well. When you get to a point with an athlete and you're doing those drills and they're moving and you've made some improvement, they're moving a lot more efficiently, they're hitting the right part of the foot. Mm-hmm. How then would you fill in that gap between that transfer to performance? If they're struggling to take that onto the field,
yep,
what then would be the next step for you?
So what I do is, okay, let's say you give me an athlete or a group of athletes, and on session number 1, I teach them the basics of change of direction, So I teach them how I want that outside foot to hit, how I want the inside foot to hit, because that inside foot, if you use it right, it will take the load off of that outside foot. It attenuates the load. That's a big part. Is like that inside plant foot it's a secret that a lot of athletes don't know how to develop or aren't taught that. And so, if they don't use that inside plant foot to slow their body down as that last decelerating step, so much more force is going on that outside leg. And that's where we can get some injuries as well. And so, yeah, teach them outside plant foot, inside plant foot, then deceleration into the cut, learning how to drop their hips, their center of mass first, kind of get their body under control before they get the feet into the right positions. I'll do that alone for maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions before doing any kind of reaction stuff. I want to see these athletes, understand what I'm looking for in the positions and the angles and where the feet are supposed to be But if I see them doing that really well, this is my go-to drill right here. And you can do it in a big group. It's a little tricky, but you got to get a couple different boxes going. But it's my point drill. I call it my box reaction point. And so get a big 10 meter by 10 meter box. Okay. And I'll have the athlete stand in the middle. And I'm like, okay, eyes on me the whole time. And I'll point to one of the corners. And they are sprinting to that corner while looking at me. And then whenever I want, I change the corner. And I tell them, it's like, as soon as you see me change the cone, I want to see you drop your center of mass. I want to see you chop your feet, get under control. And then I want to see that inside foot first, outside foot second. And they do it. And because we've done it for weeks prior, just in these simple drills, and they do it. And then I'll do this drill for every week for a while. And you can see each week, all of a sudden, their reaction, boom, boom, boom. They're stopping better, they're cutting better. And I tell athletes all the time, like, this drill right here will carry over to the field. And so it has everything that, and then if you want to throw a ball in there too, I'll throw a tennis ball at the end, the very last one. And so it's funny though, you see, I can probably load up some videos of this, but you'll see an athlete, I point this way, great cut. I point that way, great cut. I throw a ball up, awful cut. It's all of a sudden the eyes go on something they had to react to, and they throw out everything that they've learned. And I'll stop the drill. I'm like, it's like no, that was an awful cut. Yeah. I was like, you need to do it while you're looking at something and reacting to it. Otherwise, it will not carry over to the pitch. And so that's my go-to right there. And then there's so many variations of that kind of drill as well. But I teach them the mechanics first. I teach them. I train their bodies to handle more load, more eccentric, faster loads, and then I get into the reaction part. And usually that works really well.
Yeah, I love that. How complex would you go with those drills though? Because obviously on the pitch, you just talked about adding an additional stimulus in terms of a ball or something else on top of that. Obviously within a game, they've got a lot going on. They've got a lot of things to consider. How complex would you go? Or was that where you take it to and just really try and master that?
That's a great question. I'm not a soccer coach. I will rarely bring a soccer ball out into my sessions. I feel like they get a lot of that in their practice and their training with their soccer coaches. And so what I'm trying to do is, look at their sport, look at the demands of their sport, what kind of movements they do. Let's say it's a defender. Okay, what's a defender doing? There's times where he's hitting max velocity. There's times where he's accelerating fast to get to the ball first. There's times where he's moving one direction and he's got to instantly stop and redirect, going back at an angle. And so I'm looking at all those things, and then I'm like, okay, well, let's improve all of those. And it is simple to say, but if you can increase their outside plant foot, their inside plant foot, and their deceleration, all three of those are fast eccentric loading. And so you can, let's say I never do any true reaction drills in my training, and all I did was, a bungee, or I use the 1080 now, the 1080, and I do all these different kind of drills to improve their cuts, the force into the ground, the strike. They'll get better at their position. Every position will get better. Every position on the pitch has to decelerate. They have to use an inside plant foot sometimes, mostly an outside plant foot. So if you can just increase that athlete's ability to handle those loads, they're gonna get better without doing any reaction stuff. But then you throw in the reaction stuff, it's even a more chance that you're gonna see it on the pitch. And so I don't get super specific sometimes in my training. You're not going to come into my training and, have me pass a soccer ball to an athlete and then run this way and then stop this way. It's going to be more simple, I think, than that. It's going to be, okay, sprint at me, break down like you're trying to defend me, and I'm going to throw a tennis ball that way. And then, then I can, add on that. Okay, sprint at me, I'll throw a tennis ball here. You got to get to that tennis ball. And by the by the time you get to that ball, another ball's already in the air. Or I can, take the tennis balls out and it's all pointing. And so it's like, I'll try to create like scenarios that I see that athlete will hit on the pitch. And, without getting too specific with their sport, it comes down to acceleration, deceleration, under control, acceleration, change of direction. It's like, it comes back to those basics.
Definitely. One thing I love about the stuff that you put out, and I know you've referenced it there, is you see the intent behind every single drill that the athletes are putting into it, because they've got that challenge of some sort, like a ball or whatever it's going to be. So I wanted to touch on drill designing drills. You just talked there about, I suppose, your considerations that you put in before designing a drill, the things that you want to try and get out of it. But can you talk to us a little bit about the actual process of you coming up with some of these? Because if people haven't seen them, like there's very creative, very innovative, and there's loads that people can take away from some of the things that you put out. But what's your process for designing each drill? Or is there a process?
There is, but I mean, a lot of it is, it's really hard to explain. My brain just goes there. I'll get an idea in my head. Okay, I need a good drill for, this athlete is struggling with his deceleration, right? And turning that deceleration into a reaction. I was like, well, what's a good way to train it? My brain kind of just like, we'll get there. But I guess if I try to break it down, I do use a tennis ball a lot, and I have for years. And I think I got started with the tennis ball because I would see some of these younger athletes that I train. I'd have them do a sprint, let's say even the resisted sprint, whether a sled or a 1080 or the run rocket. And I could tell that they were giving me like 90% effort. Okay. And I'm like, I know to get faster, you have to run fast. Okay. And I'll talk about that real quickly, is that rest is really important for speed training. Like if the athlete is not rested in between their reps, their sprints are going to be slower. Their intent is going to go down. You have to, you want that athlete to hit close to that fast stimulus as much as possible. So I started using the tennis ball. I'd have them with the run rocket. Back then I used the run rocket, and I'd throw a tennis ball up in the air, and I'd have them sprint after it. And I could just see instantly the effort went to the roof. I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. And to this day, I'll use a tennis ball to get that intent, because an athlete chasing after something is what almost every sport is, right?
Yeah.
Look at every sport: basketball, football, baseball, soccer. There is a ball, and an athlete is sprinting towards that ball. Okay, and so I incorporate that in my training a ton. And so then it was just kind of getting creative with like how I use that tennis ball, because I know it's not just always, athletes aren't in a 2-point stance all the time ready to sprint. They're moving around. Okay, they're hopping. And so like I just started getting like thinking through, having them sprint towards me, then throw a ball, or have them flip turn, and as soon as they flip turn, a ball's in the air and they got to go find it. And so I started getting creative with that way. And then, these are more like individual drills, but then you can go into like competition drills as well. Yeah. And so I guess, I know I'm just kind of like danced around the question. I guess what the best way that I would describe my exercise design is, I have the idea of what they're trying to train first. And so I want an athlete to train curved acceleration. Okay, well, I can set up a curve and say sprint. Okay, it's like, well, now if I throw a tennis ball, he's probably gonna go faster on that curve. And now let's throw a reaction then too. Have him sprint, and now I throw this ball or this ball. He's got to pick which way he curves. And so I think that's kind of like how like my ideas morph. Is I start with what I'm trying to train, and then I think of a way to like maybe make it more difficult or throw a reaction in there, or a way that they can have two athletes compete against each other. And so, I guess that's the simplest way I can explain it. But a lot of it is, it just kind of comes to me. And so, like, and I always tell my wife, I'm in the shower. That's when my brain is clicking. And so it's like, I'll sit in the shower and I'm going through in my head, like, each session that I have that day and what each athlete. And then I'm like, oh, maybe if I did this with that athlete. So, like, yeah, it's either in the car or in the shower is where I come up with a lot of these drills.
I love that.
And then I'll try them, and then some of them are awful. They don't work. And I'm like, okay, that's not what I had in my head. And then some of them I do instantly. I'm like, this is great. This is a keeper. So
I think a lot of people, I'll happily admit that I've done stuff in the past where you do things and you're like, right, the players are going to put everything into this, and then you're running the drill and it's like,
yeah,
it's like sort of 60, 70%. We're not getting what we want out of it. So
yeah.
I think that side of things is brilliant. Just adding that stimulus, that emphasis. And I know you said there in terms of the process, I think the really important thing that you're talking about is you've always got that target that you're trying to hit. And I think that's the main thing, isn't it? What if you work back from that, the drill is going to represent it in some way, shape, or form. Do you find as well that you could use the same drill with two different players and you'd get different reactions?
Yes. I mean, what do you mean by reactions?
Sorry, like, reaction is probably a poor. I mean, in terms of how the sort of quality that you're getting from that drill from that individual player.
Oh, all the time. And some athletes, you have to digress the drill and be like, okay, I'm gonna take the tennis ball out of it.
Yeah,
I want to see this first. Okay, or you really have to break down. Okay, why, if I have an athlete, sprint towards me and then break down and react, one athlete will be phenomenal at it, one won't. Okay, why was that athlete who did it really bad? What was bad about it? And so you have to go into the details. And so, it could be, he wasn't getting his feet wide enough when he was decelerating, and so if you're decelerating and your feet are narrow at the point of reaction, it's hard to move laterally because you can't put lateral force in the ground. It's like, or was his feet getting too wide? It's like, so you have to really look into like what that athlete did wrong. But yeah, I mean, you're going to have athletes that are going to be, some will be phenomenal at one drill, and you can have his buddy that's with him. It's just horrible. And so it's your job as a trainer to figure out why, and if you can't figure out why, then you got to figure out a drill that will get that across to him. And so that's the challenge. And that's one thing I love about the industry, is that every athlete is different, and you have to figure out what that athlete needs to get better.
100%. I know it's another area that you've talked about before, but when we're talking about athleticism and developing athleticism, this is probably going to come from parents, from coaches. Like, you're going to get people to say, like, can we improve it? So what's your opinion on that?
Absolutely. 100%. You can improve it. And so I guess athleticism is a broad, definition. And so when I think of someone who is athletic, it's going to be, their ability to accelerate explosively, stop quickly, change directions quickly, while being fluid and not tight and tense. And so, their ground reaction time is quick. They can chase after a ball while looking, the looking factors, like they can move their head, they can turn their body in space. It's everything. So I guess it's body control while being explosive.
Yeah,
is a really good one. And so then you gotta dive into, well, what's happening when someone is explosive but has body control? Well, that goes into the whole co-contraction of muscles. And so, being relaxed while being explosive. And so, I mean, your audience knows this, but like, when you're moving in one direction, one muscle group will start the movement while the opposite muscle group is relaxed, and they kind of take, they switch back and forth, bicep is firing, triceps relaxed type. So it's like, the athletes that are not very athletic, a lot of times their body's fighting itself, and the muscles are just tight and rigid, and they can't understand how to be relaxed. And so you got to come up with drills to teach them how to understand that. And so I've found a lot of multi-direction plyometrics help with that. And it can be super low intense, I do a lot of double contact plyometric jumps. What that means is, let's say I'll make it simple. I got a hurdle right here, a 6-inch hurdle. I got 2 feet. I'm going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So they're learning kind of like a rhythm of how to put force in the ground, to where if they're just kind of going back and forth really quickly, a lot of times you'll see them break down because their body can't react, or can't, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it, but basically it can't it can't prepare for the ground in time. And so because the body is fighting itself. And so if you do a lot of like simple rhythm hops in different directions, forward, sideways, forward, sideways. So they're learning how to control their body and relax, but then also put force in the ground quickly. Relax, force, relax, force. And so that's where I would start. If I got a 10-year-old who's super unathletic, can't control his body, I always start doing simple hops. And then you can intensify it the better they get at it. And then you teach them, obviously I'll go into sprint mechanics, but learning how to decelerate quickly and drop. Learning how to drop their center of mass is a really athletic component. Athletes that can't stop, they don't drop. They'll sprint and kind of just like try to kick their feet in the ground, and their like body will tip over all over the place. Well, they're not learning how to sink into it, and I can't say absorb force. I can't say it because the industry has accepted that you can absorb force, but I got called out by a sports scientist once for saying that. He's like, technically you can't absorb force, and I was like, okay, so I can't say that just because I don't want to make him upset.
But we know what you mean.
Yeah, so basically the body can't handle the load.
Yeah.
And so you got to teach them how to stay relaxed, and then on the instant turn it on. Stay relaxed, turn it on. And that's, to me, the foundation of athleticism. That was a very long answer for that, basically, but that's how I start training athleticism. So
just off the back of that, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because there's so much chat around early specialization, multi-sports for kids.
Yeah.
Do you see, because I'm sure there's over where you are, there's going to be a lot of kids that come through your program. When they get to a certain age, can you look at a kid and see the difference between the ones that have played a number of different sports and the ones that haven't? And also, does that relate to any sports in particular? Is there any that you're like, this, you see more athleticism, I suppose, with certain sports than others?
Yes, and yes, and yes. That's a tough one, because when I grew up years ago, I played every sport, right? But there were seasons for that sport. So this was soccer season. All I did was soccer. Then it was basketball season. Then it was basketball. And then it was, tennis or whatever, So you had your different sports, and that's all you did in that season. It's not like that anymore. I think club sports have kind of ruined that. And because you get club soccer, it's year round. So then you get these parents who they hear, from the industry, multi-sport athletes are really good. Multi-sport athletes are really good. So they get this soccer athlete who's in soccer all year round, and they put him in basketball, and they put him in a club basketball, and that's year round. And so now they're in like 2 or 3 sports year round. And I think it has more damage to the athlete. They're burned out, they're exhausted, their body breaks down, they're full of injuries, and they can't recover. They can't, but on the other end, if it's done right, 100%, it's good. It's good for your body to change sports, even if it's a month or 2, to do something different, let alone just for the mental part of it.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm trying to think of the sport that I see the most burnout. I'm going to say tennis. And I don't know if it's just the nature of the sport or if it's the parents. Tennis, but I see a tennis athlete that's they start super young, 6 years old, 7 years old, and they're put into all these tournaments. By the time they're 12 and 13, I've run into so many that hate tennis. They hate it, and they quit, and they take some time off, and they realize they miss it, and they come back with a whole new, perspective on the sport and a passion for it. And so I think taking time off of a sport, even if it's like a month or two, and doing something different has as many benefits. But and we know, according to research, it's like it is good for the athlete to, put them in a different sport, because they're going to be hitting different movements, different reactions. They're going to be guarding athletes differently, if they're playing defense. And so like it's really good, but it has to be done right. And so, yeah, that's my thought. I'd rather have an athlete stick with one sport than play 3 sports at the same time all year round. But
yeah, I think
some
that's
might
a
disagree
great.
with me.
No, I think it's a really good breakdown, because I think we get caught up into, obviously, young children should do as many sports as possible. Well, then there's doing as many sports as possible and doing as many sports as possible all the time, isn't there? That's probably 2 different things. So
Yeah,
I think that's a really important point that probably a lot of people don't speak about. And I think there'll be a lot of people experiencing that as well. So no, it's a great point.
I mean,
Michael, just one.
sorry, I was
Sorry,
gonna say,
go on, no, go.
it might be different here in the States. I'm not quite sure how the development, the youth programs are there, but it's, I might make some people upset in the US here, but it's about money. That's what it is. If they take off 3 months of a club soccer year, that's 3 months of revenue that they're going to miss. And so, like, I understand why they do it. I just don't agree with it, because I think it's detrimental to the athlete. I mean, I see, especially with the one-on-one nature that I have with the athletes, they once they get to know me and feel comfortable, they will open up to me, and they'll tell me like they're burnt out. They're exhausted, and then you throw school on top of that, and so there's so much. And so it's like there needs to be a break. There needs to be a break, and it's very beneficial, for the athlete. So
yeah, no, I think it's a great point. I think possibly the difference here, especially when a player is in an academy, is that they will do multi-sports, but a lot of time it's ran through the academy. So they probably will cycle it. So they're getting exposure, probably the right amount. I suppose the issue comes on top of that is if they're doing things on top of the academy work as well. So if they are then going to tournaments and doing all the rest of it and representing schools, and that's when you've got a pretty heavy workload going on.
Yeah.
I want to be really respectful of your time, because I can't believe we've done 52 minutes already. It's absolutely
man, look at that.
But I wanted to speak to you about social media, because I mean, the work that you do is massive on social media, especially on Instagram. But I think you do it in a really good way, that there's such good education that comes with it as well. It's not just putting things out for Instagram's sake. There's actually real good education with it too. So, and this is a big passion of mine that I want coaches to share, and I want them to do it in the right way. But how have you found that in terms of getting that balance between getting eyes on it, getting eyes on the work that you do, and also the education for coaches, for athletes as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. Man, I think what got me on Instagram, I'll go into that route first, is I gotta try to be respectful of some people, but my old job where I worked for a facility, we hired a social media guy, and that was like one of his, he was sales too, but mostly social media. And I saw the potential that had to grow the company, and I saw how he didn't take that seriously. He literally he had a calendar, okay, Monday was Instagram post day. So I would see him walk out of the office, take his camera and do this, walk back in, and that was the post.
Yeah.
And so me, I'm more I do have a creative background. My mom was an art teacher, right? I kind of have that creative. I saw man, if you just made some decently edited videos of our athletes in here and posted that, all of their friends are going to see that, and they're going to want to come in, and they're going to want to come in and train with you. And so that was my first thought when I went on my own. I was like, I need to make cool videos of my athletes so that they would tell their friends will see it, and I'll get that. That's how I'll grow my business. But very quickly after I did that, and I put some time, I think I bought a gimbal way back then, and you know, the kid, a good camera, like steady camera, and then I started posting more of the drills that I did, and it was really quickly the Instagram grew. I think I would post one video a week, and like my following grew really fast. And I was like, man, like, it made me realize like all of these drills that I've created for years. It's like I guess I never realized like this is beneficial for the industry. Other trainers are liking to see this, and so I started thinking more of like, okay, started thinking more drills, and I'll be completely honest, a lot of drills back then, even now, that I came up with, it's like I literally came up with them like this, and then I would film it and I'd post it. And so I was like they didn't really have any like not usage. They didn't have any like minutes behind them with actually training athletes. It was me like, hey, this is kind of a cool concept. This is maybe an interesting way of training a first step drill. And I would post it, and that grew the Instagram as well. And so, but I'll be honest, like sometimes this is really complex to me to use with my athletes. I won't use this one. And then, or I'll find one that I really, really like, and I'll use it with athletes for months. And I'm like, actually, I don't like it anymore. It's like, I think this is maybe a better way. And so it is a balance trying to find like, because I mean, speaking of burnout, I got burnt out with Instagram, and I stopped for a while because once they changed their algorithms, like you get to post every day if you want to grow. I was like, oops, I just put my earpiece out. I was like, that's too much for me. I was like, I had some new, some babies at the time. I was tired. I was exhausted. I was like, I can't dedicate this much effort to it. And so I took some time off of Instagram, and it was when I moved out of Chicago and had to start my business over again. I was like, okay, let's start this process all over again. Let's take videos of my athletes. Let's get the word out in Tulsa of what I do. And so that kind of got me in the passion again of posting on Instagram and posting more videos. But yeah, it's hard to balance, like, because some the pushback that you get from some trainers, like this is garbage. Like I only post things that I really think are like really, really good. And so it's tough sometimes to get some pushback, which I'm all for. That's how we grow. And there's some people that have pushback that I really, really respect. And I was like, okay, explain that to me then. Like, why do you disagree with it? And they would, this is all in like DMs. They'd be like, it's like, well, no, it's actually a great drill, but I think you need to word it differently in the caption because maybe what you're saying might not be what. And so I was like, I'm always trying to be like conscious of what I'm posting, because if you start posting fluff, you lose respect in the industry. And I'm sure there's a lot of trainers out there that I respect that might look at my training and be like, you don't need that, and that's fine. We all have our own style of training. But like, I want to be respected in the field for, not just, sprint speed and linear speed, but, change of direction, how we train that. And it is really rewarding seeing people around the world using your drills. Like, that's one of my favorite things is like people will post, someone from Indonesia doing a tennis ball drill. And I'm like, they didn't do it with the best mechanics. They didn't do it the best way, but this is still great. I love it.
Yeah.
And so, but it's been really good for my business, no doubt. But it's also been, I think, fun because you see other trainers do it, but then, like I've learned so much from other trainers too. And I'm sure you have. It's just, before Instagram, we didn't really have that. This is even before YouTube. I was like, well, how did you learn? You had to go to a seminar, and that's pretty much it, or go shadow somebody. And it's like, and I think maybe that's one reason why I started getting creative with drills, because I had no other option but like, okay, well, how do I make this person better? But yeah, the Instagram thing has been it's been a blessing and a curse, because I'm sure you feel it too. You feel that you have this looming over your head. I gotta post. And I don't like that pressure, but it has been a blessing because it's very rewarding to see the community grow in certain areas. So
no, big respect to you, because I know putting your work out like that can be pretty daunting for a lot of people because of the fact that they do get people trying to shoot them down. And I think that can be done in a good way and a bad way, can't it? Like if it encourages good conversation, then it's probably an education for both sides. If people are just going out there to shoot people down and just for the sake of it, like there's not much to take from that, is there? But no, I fully respect people like yourself that share so much, and there's so much that I know coaches and listeners of this podcast could take away from some of the things that you posted. So if they haven't done already, I urge them to go and check it out, because there's some brilliant drills on there that definitely could be used. Michael,
Appreciate you.
if people want to check out your work, where would you direct them to?
Yeah, I would go to my Instagram. Here's a plug for my new program. And we talked about this before we started recording, but I've had that idea in my head for years to take my change of direction principles and agility training and use the agility ladder as a tool. Because I'm sure a lot of us know the agility ladder has many benefits, but one of them is not actually training change of direction and agility. And athletes around the world spend hours and hours and hours on the ladder. And so I wanted to create a program to where they can use the ladder to improve their cutting, to improve their fast eccentric loading. And so I put a lot of time into this program, and I just launched it, I think it was last week. I call it the Ladders Aren't Dead program. Let's revive the ladders. And so and yes, I'm biased, but it is a great program. And I'm very confident, if an athlete will do this program consistently for 8 weeks, they will be a different athlete. And so it is my kind of like my nuts and bolts of change of direction. There's no reaction drills. I think my next program might be more of the reaction type drills, but it is learning how the foot hits the ground, inside foot, outside foot, how to strike the ground, how to move your center of mass. It's the nuts and bolts of my methodology, and it's a great program. And you buy it once and it's yours for life. So
amazing. Tell people to go and check it out. And it's Drach Performance over on Instagram.
Exactly. Yep. And that's the website too, drachperformance.com. And so all that information is on the website as well. DRACH.
Perfect. Top man, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much for freeing up some time and coming on.
No, thanks so much for reaching out, and I'm glad we did this. This was great.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you.